We are fortunate to have with us Texas Senator Ted Cruz. Senator, good to have you back on the show. Really appreciate your time in the midst of this dark hour. I know you've spent the last few hours over at Camp Mystic. Just give a sense of the scene on the ground.
There aren't words to describe it. It's the most horrible thing I've ever seen. The water rose from the river. The river on over to the side there is quite calm, but on the early hours of July 4th, it rose over 30 feet. And you look at the cabins, the girls' cabins, the water rose 7 and 8 feet in every one of the cabins. And you just look at the cabins are cleaned out. All of the furniture has been pulled out by the current. It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
We now have over 100 fatalities. It is amazing that more girls at Camp Mystic did not die that morning, given the horrors. But I want to tell you, Linsey, in the face of it all, it's also inspiring. I've spent the whole day seeing just Texans helping Texans,
yeah.
and that so many people saved another Texan's life. I met a family who had a 14-year-old son who was in La Junta, which is another summer camp here. And he was awakened at 3 a.m. and told, come help the younger campers escape. And he went down, and the 7 or 8-year-olds, he helped them swim to safety. And the parents were crying. Their son was safe and alive. And I said, look, this is a trauma he'll always deal with, but he'll always know that he helped save the lives of those little kids. That story of heroism was repeated over and over and over again in the last few days.
I know this is personal for you on a number of layers, not only being the senator here, but your daughters. Know some of those who passed away or are still unaccounted for. How are they handling this?
So where we are right now is the hill country, which is central Texas. I think it's the prettiest part of Texas. They're rolling hills, they're beautiful rivers, and there are about 40 camps in Kerr County, and there's a real tradition of camps. My daughters have gone to summer camp here for 10 years. Just last week, Heidi was in town picking our youngest daughter, Catherine, up from camp. There's an iconic store here called the Hunt Store, which just last week, Heidi and Catherine were at the Hunt Store. The Hunt Store is now totally a shell. The floodwaters ripped it out. And I got to say, I was just there. They changed the sign, and instead of saying Hunt Store, it now says Hunt Strong. And there was a barbecue truck out front of some Texans from down on the Gulf Coast who had been impacted by Hurricane Harvey, and they remembered people from Hunt came down to help them. So they got in a truck and came up here and said, we're going to serve barbecue. It is, look, for every mom and dad, this is the worst nightmare. And over the last few days, I've talked to so many family members who've lost a child or had a child they didn't know where she was. And the fear and terror. And what I just say is I'm inspired in the face of unspeakable tragedy, the unity we're seeing across Texas.
So we know that there are still at least 20 unaccounted for, 10 of them children and a counselor. Do we know what's being done at this moment to try to find them?
So the search and rescue is ongoing. So we've got helicopters in the air. We have ground teams that are systematically going through different areas of geography. But you've got about 100 kilometers of river. That's a lot of distance. And then we also have dogs. At this point, there's enormous amounts of debris, and we're going to continue searching, and we pray that we find every one of those little girls alive. Obviously, every day that goes on, the odds of that go down. And so at this point, we have to keep searching and we have to keep praying.
Of course, people are going to Monday morning quarterback this ultimately. But for those who are asking about answers, saying, look, the alerts went out in a timely fashion. Why were there children and adults who were stranded without a way to get out of these low-lying areas? Was there a problem with the communication from state and local officials?
Look, I think that's a reasonable question to ask. You know, in any disaster, there's a natural order of how things play out. The first thing you deal with is search and rescue, just getting people out of harm's way. We're at the closing portion of that period. The next period is rebuilding. There are people throughout this region who've lost their home, have lost everything, rebuilding, coming back. There's going to be, over the coming weeks and the coming months, I think, a careful retrospective looking at the timeline, exactly what unfolded, and asking what could have been done better. And I hope and believe we will learn lessons. We know the National Weather Service put out one warning just after 1 a.m. They put out another warning just after 4 a.m. There's no doubt any one of us, if we had a time machine, we could step in it right now. we would run to those girls' cabins and pull them out of the cabins before the floodwaters rose. And so it's worth asking, what could have been done differently? One of the problems with a warning at 1 a.m. or 4 a.m., most people are asleep. And so there's been discussion, for example, of setting up alarms with a siren. We've seen that up in the Texas Panhandle where you have tornadoes. That can be effective. I'll tell you, I had a conversation today with Texas's Lieutenant Governor suggesting they add that to the call of the next special session. I think steps like that, that's a reasonable inquiry, and I expect the local government, the state government, the federal government, all to engage in that conversation.
We know that you were on a pre-planned trip with your family in Greece on Friday afternoon when this all happened. There were critics who were saying, why didn't you come back until Sunday? You want to explain the delay?
Look, people love to play politics. I was overseas on a family vacation when this happened. I was almost immediately on the phone with Texas Governor Greg Abbott. I was on the phone with Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. I was on the phone with Nim Kidd, who's the head of the Texas Emergency Management. I called President Trump, and I said, Mr. President, this is still early in the crisis that's unfolding, but what we know right now, it looks really bad. That there could be an incredible loss of life. We're going to need real federal resources. The president committed to me. He said, Ted, anything Texas needs, the answer is yes. And so in the early morning hours as the flood was happening, we had over a dozen helicopters up in the air over the river. We had Coast Guard, we had Texas Department of Public Safety, we had National Guardsmen. There were over 850 rescues that came during this crisis, and then I booked a flight and came back, booked a flight on Sunday morning, came back Sunday night. When you're flying overseas, it takes time to cross an ocean, and so I flew back to be here, and I got to say, look, this day, listening to the folks struggling, to the folks who are just at the camp. One of the things at the camp, there were parents there. A lot of the campers' possessions, their sleeping bags, there were teddy bears, there were sandals and Crocs. They were lined up, and many of them had the campers' names on them. And you saw parents or you saw other little girls. I don't know if they were Mystic campers. I don't know if they were siblings. In front of one cabin, the cabin that had among the youngest campers, there were 13 lone white crosses with the names of little girls who lost their lives. And I will tell you, I just stood and prayed, kneeling beside those crosses, because those little girls, 2 of them go to school with my daughter. We picked up my daughter last week. That could have been her as easily there, but for the grace of God go by. And so, look, that's my focus, is we're going to come back from this. Hunt's going to come back from this. Texas is going to come together. We're going to overcome this disaster. And then that's who we are. That's who Texas is.
Senator Ted Cruz,
thank you
so much. We appreciate you coming on the show tonight.